What's up guys? Welcome back to the channel Hand Waving. Your friend Naruto Addict 2.0 is here again with a brand new Naruto fanfic that's going to change everything. A story where Naruto is betrayed and banished. But destiny has bigger plans for him. From exile to emperor, this is the journey of power, strategy, and love. Today's fanfic is titled, What If Naruto Started Training with Jiraiya Early? Naruto, Jiraiya, Hiruzen, Iruka, Nine Tails Part 2. Kakashi. Jiraiya responded, You want Kakashi to take care of the boy? He can barely take care of himself at the moment. All he does is take missions and recklessly train until he drops. No, he would be a horrible caretaker. He needs to talk to the boy though. It'll be good for both of them. I believe Kakashi was Itachi's captain before he was promoted himself. Sasuke will need to talk about it with somebody who he can relate to, even just a little bit. Jiraiya explained. It was only during times like this, that Hiruzen didn't question his student's title as a sage. Despite his childishness and antics, he could occasionally spout wisdom even better than the Hokage himself could. That plan is sound. Sarutobi said, There is an issue with you taking Sasuke-kun though. He explained, You know that we must present a strong front, so you will need to take on missions. Dangerous missions, in dangerous places, to show that we aren't hurting from our diminished forces. I'm well aware. I have a plan for that. Naruto is currently at Mt. Myoboku with the Toads. I believe, given the extenuating circumstances, that the Toads will allow a non-summoner on their sacred grounds. I'll take Sasuke there to stay with Naruto. It will be good for both of them to be away from people for a while. The Toads can also summon and reverse summon me so I can visit sporadically to check up, without losing ground on my missions. Sarutobi nodded at this. It was a good plan, keeping Sasuke away from the rumors and gossip, however short it might be. Alright Jiraiya, I will put my faith in you, seeing as I have already failed this village more times than I can count. Take the boy, help him as best you can, and then return for your missions. Sarutobi said, It has already been a week since the massacre. I expect that in another week most other villages will know, so I expect you back and out on a mission before then. The Hokage finished. Jiraiya nodded, and then moved to leave through the window. Nobody would feel threatened by somebody leaving the Hokage tower after all. He opened the window, but before he could leap out of it, Hiruzen stopped him. Jiraiya. Thank you. I know you have no wish to take my place, but you are doing a great job making decisions, hard decisions, selfless decisions, that only help others from Konoha, and not yourself. The way I see it, you are our shadow Hokage. I rule in the light for all to see within the village, but ever since Minato died, you have taken care of the things that aren't seen by the villagers. Do the things that must be done to help in the long run, even if you're the only person who can truly see that at the time. Thank you for your service. The sensei of the Sannin said. Jiraiya didn't turn around, and he didn't need to. Sensei knew him better than anybody else at this point. He nodded ever so slightly, and then took off again. Sasuke didn't know where they were exactly. Jiraiya-sama had said that he was taking him somewhere safe to be with a friend. When he arrived at the colorful mountainside village, he didn't see any friends, just the annoying blonde dead lass that had left his academy class a while ago. Pervy sage, what's he doing here? Naruto's tone was accusational. The old man knew he didn't like Sasuke, that he was his rival. You didn't let him sign the summoning contract, did you? No way I'm sharing with that bastard. Naruto shouted. Jiraiya sighed. It seemed one whole day with the Toads wasn't enough to teach him some respect. Oh well, Naruto, language. And no, Sasuke won't be signing the Toad contract, he's just gonna stay here with you for a few months while I take care of some dangerous missions for the village. Too dangerous for a couple of 8-year-olds, sorry. Jiraiya cut off Naruto's train of thought before it could even get going. Naruto hated this, hated that stupid Sasuke with his stoic-looking face, though he had improved greatly in the last 8 months. Plus, he had his shadow clone jutsu so he could beat the jerk up 10 times at once. His internal evil laugh could almost be seen by Jiraiya as he worked out Naruto's thought procession, though Sasuke just looked confused, as well as he hid it from his face. Fine old man, but you owe me a new jutsu for this. I wanna learn the hair one. Naruto finally shouted at his sensei. Very well Naruto, I'll teach you the hair one when I come back for good in a few months. I'll be stopping by every now and then to check up on you guys. Jiraiya turned to Sasuke. You're more than welcome to join Naruto in his training while you're here, or you can just laze around and do whatever pleases you. If you need anything, just ask one of the toads, they'll all help you or find one that will for you. Jiraiya explained softly. He hated to leave the boy alone after such a tragic incident, but it was better than being alone in the village. In truth, he was hoping Naruto would spin some of that fiery magic within him and help Sasuke through this tough time. The boy had a way of giving people hope when all had felt lost. Jiraiya left with a call of, "Be good," over his shoulder that was directed at a certain blonde more than the black-haired child. Naruto stuck out his tongue and looked at Sasuke, really looked at Sasuke, for the first time since he left the village, or maybe ever, he thought to himself. The small Uchiha wore a stoic expression like always, face perfectly masked, just as he'd been taught. Naruto saw the truth though, saw it in his eyes. Sadness. Naruto's own facial expression softened. What happened? He inquired. Sasuke felt betrayed by Jiraiya-sama, who assured him he wouldn't tell Naruto what was going on. He had seen their interaction though, unless they knew some sort of secret code, which he didn't think Naruto capable of learning, the Sannin hadn't said a word. Sasuke grunted. He had been doing that for a week now, but it had worked to get the adults to leave him alone and stop asking him how he was doing. Well, what the hell does that mean? Did you forget how to talk? Or are you just shocked by my pure awesomeness? Naruto questioned brashly. Sasuke was surprised by this. The adults had all left him alone when he did that, as obvious as it was that he didn't want to talk. Maybe the blonde was too dumb to understand. It means I don't want to speak with you. Sasuke said shortly. Why not? Naruto asked back. The question was genuine, and to Sasuke, it didn't just seem like it was out of curiosity. For some reason it felt like Naruto actually cared about him. I don't wish to talk about what happened. Sasuke said, then lowered his eyes and quickly finished, it's too hard. Naruto knew that look. He knew questioning wouldn't help anymore. Okay. Well, what do you wanna do? He asked. Sasuke was surprised again. Nobody had asked him what he wanted. Sure, they had all wanted to help, but they wanted to do it their way. After a few seconds of thinking, he replied, I want to get stronger. Naruto smiled at that. He understood that. He didn't know Sasuke's reasoning, but he didn't have to. They had the same goal, and that was all that mattered. Alright, well, let's start training then. Come on, Grandpa Toad Sage will help us, he's super strong. Naruto grabbed Sasuke by the wrist and took off running towards Fukasaku, who was seated on a toad statue a couple 100 feet away. Sasuke didn't even have time to call Naruto a loser before his wrist was grabbed and he was yanked away. He didn't feel like fighting him either. It felt like too much work after all he had been through, so he just let the blonde drag him. He'd get him back for it later. Second, I hope you like the idea of Naruto more or less trying to copy Jiraiya, who at this point in time he sees as a hero. This will sort of be a theme as Naruto advances as a shinobi. If you didn't check out the Instagram, StolenHawk22, with the illustration I made. I don't blame you, I hate it already. It's not really my style, and I don't know why I drew it that way. I really love the next two though, so I will continue to encourage you as I post them. Thank you for the helpful reviews and comments, except the person who said that Sasuke and Naruto shouldn't be friends because Uchihas are all better off dead. They're 8 and neither of them have friends at the moment, leave the chibis alone. However, as it's said in the story, Sasuke won't be joining them forever, just a few months to let the village gossip cool down, and to be a foundation for Naruto and Sasuke's friendship rivalry arch-enemy-ship. I'm not telling how it turns out because that would be a spoiler and I still haven't figured out how to flag those on Reddit, let alone on here. Okay, I'll stop ranting in a run-on sentence and get to the story. Stolen Hawk. Sasuke had decided that Naruto was the most annoying person ever. Without debate. No question. The most annoying trait Sasuke had learned about him was that he was good. The first time they had sparred, he had given Sasuke a run for his money, and nearly beaten him. That had been a taijutsu-only spar, one of Sasuke's strongest abilities. When they sparred using chakra, Naruto had whooped him. The Uchiha were supposed to be the strongest of the clans in Konoha. Repeated in his head, cutting off his train of thought. His father had always told him about the might of the Uchiha, about how strong his clan was, and how an average Uchiha was an elite ninja amongst the Leaf forces. Not that it mattered anymore, there was only one other Uchiha now, and he was no longer part of the Leaf forces. That bastard. If he couldn't even beat Naruto the dead last, how would he ever beat Itachi? His fireball was nothing if he couldn't figure out which version of Naruto was real and which was a fake. Which was a Kage Bunshin, a jutsu he knew that his big brother could also use. He had begrudgingly asked Naruto to show him how to perform the technique. The blonde loser had the audacity to laugh in his face and tell him no, that only the Hokage or Jiraiya-sama could give him permission to teach it to somebody. Sasuke had about killed him then, though he wasn't sure how he would do it without any ninja tools. Punching the boy to death sounded good enough to him though. So Sasuke had done what he thought was best to catch up. Catch up to the moron who was dead last in his class just 8 months ago. 9 now after spending a month at the weird Toad village. Training with the Toads had been strange, though he couldn't deny the benefits of it. The old wrinkly Toad Fukasaku, whose name reminded him far too much of his dead father's, had asked him and Naruto to run through their skills so he could get an idea of what they needed. Sasuke had shown him the standard Academy Bunshin and Kawarimi, as well as his clan's coveted Kaden, Gokaku no Jutsu fire release, great fireball technique, that his father had taught him. Sasuke told him he was the best in his age at throwing shuriken and kunai, and was learning how to incorporate ninja wire too. The old Toad had explained there weren't any ninja weapons like that on MT Myoboku because Toads didn't use them. Their webbed hands made it difficult. Fukasaku had seemed impressed with his skills, and commended him for having acquired them at such a young age. Sasuke had smiled but it didn't reach his eyes. His big brother Itachi had all he had and more at his age. He was already a ninja and had acquired his Sharingan. Sasuke had a long ways to go. His smile disappeared when Naruto took his turn showing off. He showed off the Kawarimi, and though it was nothing special, it was almost faster than Sasuke's, which frustrated him that he was catching up so fast. The frustration turned to fury when Naruto made 10 Kage Bunshin and they all high-fives each other like the morons that they were. It only grew when Naruto ran to the nearest tree and proceeded to walk right up it without any difficulty. He then ran to the nearest body of water and walked on it. He had only ever seen Itachi do that. Then he shouted, much too loudly, that he was learning the basics of Fuinjutsu too, something Sasuke knew nothing about. He almost couldn't contain his rage. How the hell did this loser catch up to him? Sasuke knew if they fought, it would be close. Even his Uchiha pride was telling him it wasn't a guaranteed win. He couldn't do those things that Naruto could, but in turn, Naruto couldn't shoot fireballs. Fukasaku had smiled at Naruto and told him he was doing an excellent job as well, and the dummy had grinned back like a loser. Then it was time to spar, and even the moron's taijutsu had gotten good. Not just better, but good. He could probably be Kiba and Choji at this point, who were the next best in their class. Then came the chakra spar. Sasuke had thought he had him, but when the fireball collided with the blonde, the 8-year-old just went poof. Up in smoke, and not the way Sasuke wanted him to. Next thing Sasuke knew, a short blade was being held to his neck. Gotcha, Grumpy. Naruto had shouted. Where the hell did you get that blade? I thought Fukasaku-sama said toads didn't use them. You cheated. Sasuke spat out. Language Sasuke. The moron had said with a fake-looking stern face. And shinobi rule number says that a shinobi's life isn't fair. If you don't like it, then you should do something about it. Naruto said gleefully. Fine. Sasuke replied, and grabbed the blonde by the wrist and flipped him over his head, landing him on his back. In the process, disarming Naruto and holding the kunai up in front of him in a general stance. The blonde shot him an upside-down scowl, which turned into a blinding grin, and he hopped back to his feet and spun around to face the Uchiha. I like the way you think, Sasuke. He had almost giggled out. Putting his left hand to the side of the ugly scroll he carried on his back, Sasuke saw Naruto make a puff of smoke, and suddenly he also had a kunai in his hand. Round 2 starts right. Naruto made a feint to his right and then came back to the left with a slash of his kunai. Sasuke blocked Naruto's strike with his own kunai, and the two held the stalemate. Now, Naruto shouted, and promptly disappeared in a puff of smoke. Sasuke was shocked. It had been a clone the whole time. But the kunai in his hand was still there, so that was real. He heard laughter coming from behind him to the left. He whirled around to find Naruto on the ground holding his side, laughing hysterically. You shoulda seen the look on your face, ha 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 ha. You were like. Naruto made an exaggerated surprised face, holding his hands to his cheeks, mouth and eyes wide open. Ha 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 ha, the great Uchiha looking like a fool. Naruto continued laughing. Sasuke was almost more surprised at Naruto's reaction. They were in the middle of a spar and he was on the ground laughing. This one was probably a clone too, he had decided. How could you tell what my face looked like if you were behind me, you idiot? He spat out, throwing the kunai at the clone. The kunai struck the bunshin in the shoulder, and the clone yelled. Ow, you bastard, that hurt. Naruto screeched. Huh, guess it wasn't a clone then. Tough luck for the loser. Good thing it was a blunted kunai and hadn't actually cut him at all. I'll get you back for that. Naruto yelled and then paused. You make a good point though, I couldn't actually see your face, I just know it looked stupid, ya know. Naruto said in a completely normal, for him, tone of voice. Sasuke was surprised yet again, this time by the 180 in his attitude, but wouldn't let him win. And how could you possibly know that it looked stupid? Sasuke asked monotonously, and immediately regretted it when he saw the grin break out on Naruto's face. Because it always does, ha ha ha. Naruto hollered back. Sasuke had had enough. He didn't what any sane person would do when facing a crazy person. He charged. The two had fought until they dropped, Sasuke winning more than losing since he had a blade to work with. He just felt better fighting with one his hand, more confident than without. That had been the first day. It was now day 30. Naruto had been shocked when he had beat Sasuke on the first day, and kept up with him in most aspects throughout their training, though the bastard could still spit fire and he was definitely jealous of that, and definitely not going to tell him. Still, training with Fukasaku was really fun, and most of the time Sasuke wasn't so bad, though he was grumpy all the time, kinda like that giant fox he had met when he was back in the village. They both had gotten faster, stronger, and better at chakra control in their month with the toads. Naruto had also been learning the Gamayuden, toad oil bullet, which was totally awesome. And he was getting to meet all the cool toads who were all also totally awesome. His favorite part though had been when Sasuke had thrown up after eating Shima-sama's cooking. Then he had to fake that he just wasn't feeling well so that she wouldn't whack him on the head the way she did with Fukasaku. Speaking of the old toad, he spoke up to the two boys, who were sitting in front of him in a large clearing away from the village. Today we will learning about combination techniques, boys. Do either of you know what that means? He questioned. The raven-haired boy didn't respond, but the blonde did, very enthusiastically. Ooh, Pervy Sage says that that's what Old Man Third is best known for, right? He asked eagerly. The blonde either knew or was able to do many things that he hadn't expected and even he himself couldn't do, but he had started to adjust to the unpredictability that was Naruto, and no longer got upset about it. After all, He was still winning more spars than he lost, and while he wasn't gaining ground in their training, he wasn't losing it either. He also knew he was getting stronger than he would be in the academy right now. It had to move too slow so that the lesser students could keep up. Very good, Naruto boy, but do you know what it means? The boy shook his head, still enthusiastically, which would be weird for anybody but Naruto. Combination techniques are when a ninja, or ninjas, use multiple techniques that together make a much stronger technique than the two or more would separately. The sage explained, the most well-known one would be using a wind jutsu with a fire jutsu. The wind powers the fire to not only move faster, but to gain size and burn hotter. There are plenty of other techniques that can be combined, but today, we're going to focus on one that you two can do together. The toad finished. Naruto loved the idea of that. Sasuke hated it. He didn't need the blonde to make him stronger, he would get plenty strong on his own. Now I'll demonstrate it first since it's complicated, but you will be combining Naruto's Gamayuden Toad Oil Bullet with Sasuke's Gokaku no Jutsu Great Fireball technique, which will create a bigger and stronger fire, but instead of being faster, it will spread more, like water, or like the plain Gamayuden would. He explained. Sasuke, would you shoot a fireball out into the field? Once you start I will shoot the Gamayuden. Normally it's the other way around, but the difficult part about combination jutsu is that in order for them to be most effective and safe, the chakra in each jutsu must be matched nearly exactly. Fukasaku said. Sasuke nodded and rained through his hand seals ending on tiger, and after building the necessary pressure and heat up, shot a large fireball out over the field. Immediately, Fukasaku ran through his own hand seals and shot a high-powered stream of toad oil at the fireball. The two collided and sent of a wave of heat that was almost like an explosion, and both of the 8-year-olds had to shield their faces. When the heat died down after a few seconds, they lowered their arms. The whole field was on fire. The whole thing. Sasuke was sure that the fireball alone wouldn't have lit more than a tenth of it on fire. The wrinkly toad had made his techniques 10 times more powerful. This didn't seem right, and he voiced as such. Well, it isn't technically 10 times more powerful, but it burned hotter and covered roughly 10 times more area than just your fireball would have. If it were a wind technique I had used, it would have been much hotter and more powerful, but it wouldn't have covered as much area as a liquid like toad oil does. Fukasaku explained after dousing the field in a sweetened, water release jutsu. That was crazy to Sasuke. How did that even work? He didn't know enough about chakra to understand, but he wanted to. Techniques like that would help him defeat his brother, and that's all that mattered to him now. It had taken 3 days for the Uchiha and Uzumaki to get the combination technique down. 3 days. Most of that time was spent with Naruto trying to perfect the toad oil bullet. In reality, they had only tried the combination 7 times. The first 5 hadn't gone well, mostly Naruto shooting out too much oil, which overwhelmed the flames. Then Sasuke, never one to be outdone, had shot out an even bigger fireball to try and top the blonde, who had successfully lowered the amount of oil, and suddenly there was too much fire, and the oil couldn't properly fuel it. Finally Naruto said he knew how much to use, and told Sasuke to use a normal-sized Gokaku, Great Fireball, and the two synced their chakra near perfectly, lighting the field ablaze. Fukasaku had been a little shocked. It had taken him and Jiraiya 2 months to be able to combine their toad oil and fire technique. Granted, it was a much more devastating scale, but they were both wielding nature energy, which gave them enhanced sensory abilities, which in turn made it easier for them to judge the chakra. The 2 children were special, of that he was certain. Seeing their innate ability at wielding chakra, and fighting in general, Fukasaku decided to train them differently, perhaps in a way that they couldn't receive in the outside world. You want me to do what now? The little blonde questioned stupidly. The next portion of your training will be meditation, so you must sit as still as you can. Try and become one with nature if you will. Fukasaku explained. Grandpa Toad Sage, do you know who you're talking to here? The blonde questioned. The Uchiha snorted at this, in a very un-Uchiha fashion. Nobody was here to admonish him though, and as much respect as he'd gained for the toads, he didn't feel like he had to keep up appearances for them. He certainly didn't need to act respectfully around Naruto, that moron wouldn't even know the difference, so he let some of his discipline slip from his Uchiha facade, and acted a little more naturally. It felt good if he was honest with himself. Fukasaku nodded at that, and leaned in to whisper to Naruto. Remember that sage technique that I showered you when you got here? Naruto nodded aggressively, all thoughts of the proposed torture gone. Well, this is actually the very first step in learning that. I suppose if you're not ready for it, then we can move on to something else. Fukasaku laid the bait, and Naruto fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. No way, old toad. I can sit still as long as you need me to, just let me know when I can move again. He said resolutely, and closed his eyes, taking on the position that the toad had showed him. The craziest part was, he was telling the truth. For 5 hours Naruto sat there and didn't move. Sure, he was swaying and twitching, but he never got up to move, and never opened his eyes. Sasuke, who made it an hour and a half before peeking over at Naruto, mostly to check to make sure he was alive, was shocked. Too shocked. After Fukasaku told Naruto he could move again, the boy calmly stood up, before Sasuke threw a rock at him. Ow, you bastard, that hurt. The blonde screeched. Sasuke's lip curled up slightly, and very smugly if you asked Naruto. Language, Naruto. He corrected. And I had to make sure that you weren't a clone or something. I didn't think you could sit still for that long and be that quiet. Naruto nodded like this made sense, then smiled devilishly. I'll be getting you back for that. Sasuke paled, which Naruto thought meant that he was nearly translucent. Mission accomplished. In truth, Naruto hadn't been quiet the whole time. In fact, he'd been yelling, quite a bit, at a giant grumpy old fox in a sewer, which was also his brain. But was a sewer. He still didn't understand how a whole sewer system fit in his brain, let alone a gigantic fox. Well, I had some company that helped me pass the time, Naruto said. Then before Sasuke could question what he meant, he added. Alright, Grandpa Toad Sage, I did all that, so I can burn off some energy with some real training, right? He shouted, once again back to his normal Naruto self. It was at that moment that Jiraiya made his first appearance in a little over a month. Oh ho, Naruto, what's rule number 6 again? Jiraiya asked with a grin. Pervy sage, Naruto yelled, giving him a flying hug. When he let him go and stepped back and proudly lifted his chin and said, Shinobi rule number 6, everything is training, but how is sitting around doing nothing training? You are never doing nothing, Naruto. If you must remain still, then you are training your patience. Meditating like you were is also useful for several other things, including chakra and body awareness, which will help you during fighting. Jiraiya responded. Well, I don't know about patience, I just did it because Fukasaku Gigi told me it was the first step to being able to lift that stone toad above my head. Naruto explained, it was actually kind of peaceful until that grumpy old fox started talking to me and calling me weak and stuff. Jiraiya saw Sasuke quirk his head at that, but the Uchiha didn't say anything. Let's go talk about that then, Naruto. We wouldn't want your meditation to keep being interrupted, would we? Jiraiya then turned to Sasuke. I'll be back, Sasuke. Do you mind waiting with Pa? Maybe he can teach you a little more about meditation. HN, was all Sasuke replied with, though Jiraiya noticed he was eager to learn, and just hiding it well. So, Jiraiya took Naruto over to an empty field and sat him down, and explained to him how the Kyuubi, 9 tails, ended up sealed inside of him. Naruto was a little shocked to learn that the demon fox that had nearly destroyed the village was sealed inside of him. He couldn't wrap his head around the fact that the Yondaime, his hero, had sealed the fox in him. He also couldn't wrap his head around having another living thing sealed inside of him. It was weird. The fox, while definitely grumpy, and full of hate too, hadn't seemed all that bad to him. Sure, he called him weak, but that didn't mean much considering the fact that he was the one that was locked up. There was that sadness in him too, The fox would never admit to as much, but Naruto could feel it in him, deep down. Jiraiya could see the emotions on Naruto's face as they came and went. What he didn't see a lot of was anger, which was what he had been expecting. He voiced his thoughts. How come you don't seem very angry? Why would I be angry? I'm not the one that got sealed into a baby. Naruto replied simply. Well, the fox is the reason the villagers treated you like they did. Whoa. That's why they're all jerks. That makes so much sense now that I think about it. They think I'm the one who killed all those people and almost destroyed the village. Naruto asked incredulously. Well, that doesn't give me a whole lot of faith in the people of the village. They'd have to be stupid to think a 7-year-old was the one that attacked the village, you know. Naruto quipped. Well, yes, but they don't think you did it really. They know the fox did it, they just think that you're the fox. Or they know you're not, but are in denial and want something to take it out on. A young boy is an easy target. Naruto nodded, as that kind of made sense. Then the boy, ever pure as he was, smiled. Well, I guess I'll just have to show them how awesome Naruto Uzumaki really is. Naruto shouted with a fist pump. That still doesn't explain why the fox is sad though. Sure, I'd be sad if I got sealed away, but if I killed a bunch of people and destroyed a village, I'd probably feel like I deserved it. Naruto explained. He's probably not sad, Naruto. He's most likely trying to manipulate you so that he can find a way to escape or send you on a rampage. Jiraiya responded. Naruto frowned at this. If the fox was trying to manipulate him, then why was he trying to hide the sadness? Naruto didn't say anything, but this bothered him. After a minute of pondering, Naruto's attention span wandered. He perked up. Pervy Sage, Sasuke and I learned a combination technique in it. Is awesome. You have to see it, come on. He shouted. Jiraiya was surprised by this, as combination techniques were really difficult to do, between experienced Jonin who had been teammates their whole lives. Nonetheless, he followed Naruto back over to where Sasuke was meditating. Naruto threw a pebble that pelted Sasuke in the shoulder, breaking him of his inner thoughts. Come on, bastard. Naruto ignored Jiraiya's call for him to clean up his language. I wanna show Pervy Sage the combo jutsu. Sasuke was rubbing his shoulder and looking awfully grouchy, but he did enjoy doing the jutsu. It was pretty cool. The two boys started off towards one of the clearings that they were allowed to use the jutsu in, with the Toad Sage and Sage Toad following behind, talking in hushed whispers. They got to the grounds, and got right to it. Ready, Naruto said. Sasuke nodded. Alright, go for it then. Sasuke and Naruto both ran through their hand signs, Naruto finishing slightly before Sasuke and spewing out his Gammyudan while Sasuke spat his Gokakyu. The two jutsu collided and nearly exploded, covering tenfold of what the normal fireball would have, and doing way more damage than the toad oil otherwise would have. Jiraiya was impressed. Very impressed. That technique could easily take out some Chunin, though it would need a little more speed, or surprise to get a Jonin. He let the boys know that he was proud of them, but didn't let on to just how impressive it was. Alright Naruto, I need to speak with Sasuke now, why don't you go with Pa and see if he'll teach you something, another jutsu, huh? Naruto's eyes went wide and he looked at Fukasaku, and the toad couldn't help but smile and nod at him. They took off for another training area, leaving Sasuke and the Sannin alone. How are you holding up? Jiraiya asked. Fine. He most certainly didn't look or sound fine. We don't know where he is, unfortunately. He seems to have escaped us. Jiraiya lied. It was what the Sandaime had told him Itachi wanted though. Sasuke didn't respond, but tears filled his eyes. Go on, let it out. It won't do any good to bottle it up. Jiraiya said. How could he do that? How could he kill them? He said he would always protect me, that we should always stick together, but then he killed our whole family and left me alone. How could he? Sasuke's words got colder and more filled with rage as he worked himself up. The tears started spilling from his eyes. He's my big brother, how could he do this to me? He was so quiet now it was almost a whisper. Sasuke felt like all the fight was leaving him. All the pent-up anger and resentment he had building for over a month now just gone. He felt ashamed at that. He had to be the one to avenge his clan, there was nobody else to do it. He had to be the one to kill his brother and restore the clan. Yet he didn't feel that way. His brain said he needed to kill Itachi. Yet, all he felt was that he missed him. Missed his big brother, who used to help him train, who was the best ninja he had ever seen. Who had been growing more distant from his family, but still took care of him. Who murdered his whole clan. He felt ashamed. Jiraiya could see the boy struggling with his emotions, and laid a hand on his shoulder. Has Naruto gotten around to telling you the shinobi rules I have given him? Jiraiya asked. Sasuke didn't respond, just kept looking down at the ground with fists clenched and tears falling. Rule number 1 says that a shinobi's life is unfair. I know a little bit about how you feel, kid. My old teammate left the village after it was discovered that he was kidnapping and experimenting on villagers. It was heartbreaking for me. I had considered him my best friend, and I felt like he betrayed me for doing that. Jiraiya said solemnly. Worse yet, I was more upset that he abandoned me, and not because he was doing awful things to the people of the village, the people that I had sworn to protect. He explained. I felt so ashamed for feeling that way. Jiraiya whispered. Sasuke looked up at him with wide eyes, surprised that someone like a legendary Sannin had felt what he was feeling. He thought ninja that strong were invincible. Jiraiya read his face like a book. Yeah, kid, we're human too, just like the rest of the world. Maybe even more so. Sasuke tilted his head in question at this. Jiraiya obliged. 3 legendary ninja. None of them stay in the village anymore. Tsunade isn't a ninja anymore, she just gambles and drinks her sorrows away. I travel about the world spying for Konoha, because the village reminds me of my failures. They offered me the spot of Hokage, but how could I take it if I couldn't even save one friend? And Orochimaru is out doing who knows what, giving in to the sickest of his temptations, all to try and become more powerful. Greed has turned him into a monster. All 3 of us are equally messed up, just in different ways. Jiraiya explained softly. Maybe that was what had happened to his brother. He had said he did it to test his abilities, maybe he had given into his greed like Orochimaru had. Did that mean that he could still be saved? He tried to put that thought away, telling himself that Itachi didn't deserve it, but it wouldn't completely vanish. It sat there in the back of his mind like a weight. He told me that I would have to gain hatred in order to defeat him. Sasuke whispered so quietly that anybody below Chunin wouldn't have even known he had spoken. Hatred is not the answer, Sasuke. It just breeds more hatred. If you spend your whole life building it to defeat him and you do, then what? He'll be dead, and you'll have much of your life left to live, but you'll be overwhelmed with hatred. Then you won't be any better than him or Orochimaru. Jiraiya explained. Sasuke nodded at this, but he didn't know what he was supposed to do. Can we go back to training? He asked. It's the only thing that clears my head. Jiraiya looked up and found there were still several hours left of light, so he nodded, and started off to find Naruto and Fukasaku. Jiraiya had left the next morning, saying he had another mission to go on. Naruto had been sad, but promised him he would kick his butt when he came back. Sasuke had thanked him and bowed deeper than he had for any non-Uchiha in his life. The next couple of weeks had been spent working on their meditation and their minds, just like they had on the first day. Fukasaku encouraged them to be as still as possible, and feel as much as they could. They both made progress on their chakra, as well as their bodies. Their movements were a little crisper, they recovered from losing their balance a little faster, and they could perform their jutsu a little bit quicker. Naruto had talked to the Kyuubi a few times during meditation, which often led to the blonde yelling at him, and the fox pretending to be asleep. Fukasaku taught Naruto a sweeten water release jutsu after Naruto begged for one, claiming he wanted to put out Sasuke's fire. To keep things fair, Fukasaku taught Sasuke a new Kaden fire release jutsu. Jiraiya stopped by every 2 weeks or so to check on them, more than happy with both boys' progress. Naruto was filling in the basics he had missed over the beginning stages of his life and time at the academy. Sasuke was learning to deal with his emotions, and even express them when he wanted. The rivalry between them was enjoyable to watch. Sasuke still had the edge, but Jiraiya could tell Naruto would soon overtake him at the rate he was going. Sasuke would likely pass him once again if he unlocked his Sharingan, which he curiously hadn't done yet. When it came time for Jiraiya to take Sasuke back to the village. 9 weeks had passed. Neither boy had sufficiently mastered their new elemental jutsu, but both were getting close, and working extremely hard at it. Naruto was determined to master Suiten, Teppadama water release, gunshot so that he could go head to head with Sasuke's fire and not have to dodge. Sasuke was determined to master Kaden, Enden fire release, flame bullet so that he could quickly ascend as one of the strongest Uchiha and restore his clan. His thoughts of his brother were still there, but they were more confused than anything. Sadness and rage didn't mix well. One demanded he spill blood, the other demanded that he lay down and cry. He ignored them the best he could and focused on things that would actually help. When it came time for the boys to part, they stood apart from each other, Jiraiya at Sasuke's side, Fukasaku and Shima at Naruto's. There was an awkward silence as neither boy knew what to say. Naruto fixed that. Next time I see you I'm gonna kick your you bastard. Naruto yelled, though his tone was light and playful. Jiraiya just facepalmed. The boy would never learn any manners. Sasuke smirked at the blonde, I'm looking forward to you failing, loser. He replied. The two stared each other down for a whole minute before Naruto blinked and Sasuke h'd at his victory. Sasuke and Jiraiya turned to leave, so Naruto turned his own back and huffed indignantly, crossing his arms. He was going to miss Sasuke, but he'd die before he said that out loud. Sasuke was thinking similar thoughts. There was nobody in the village that understood him like Naruto did. Naruto had explained how he was also from a clan that was all but extinct, and that his goal was to rebuild it. Sasuke of course hadn't believed him until Naruto had whipped out the scroll and a few of the items in it to prove that he really was an Uzumaki. How could anybody in the Leaf measure up to that? They were both orphans now, and both trying to rebuild their clan all by themselves. He begrudgingly admitted that Naruto was even near his skill level in most of the shinobi arts, though he was hopeless at genjutsu, and nowhere near his level with shuriken and kunai. He had fuinjutsu on him he supposed, though he didn't know how that would help him in a fight. Sasuke's thoughts were interrupted when he and Jiraiya reached the portal that would bring them out to the outskirts of Konoha. He didn't really understand how that worked, but it had worked on the way in so it must work on the way out too. Naruto was already moving on. Fuka had promised him a sweet headband if he took the oath and memorized all the toad names, and he nearly had them all down. He wasn't positive he had them all down perfect, but that wasn't going to stop him from making a pass through the village with the elderly toad to try and name them all. Jiraiya was beyond happy that the two boys seemed to get along, even if there was a rivalry between them already. It was going to be good for both of them to have another person in a similar situation. They could lean on each other when they needed it. Now he needed to focus on what Orochimaru was up to, and he supposed he had a new hair jutsu to teach Naruto. He was excited to get back to traveling with him again after all. One reviewer said they were unsure of having Naruto emulate Jiraiya's clothing, and asked not to have Naruto have long hair. My response is that Naruto has a fatherly-ish figure for the first time in his life, and I think it's natural for him to want to emulate somebody that he looks up to quite a bit. That's not to say that his look won't be changing as he develops new outlooks on the world. In fact, when he goes on his first C-rank mission, he'll have an entirely different outfit on. As far as the long hair goes, Naruto will be growing his hair out, it will not be like Jiraiya's though. When it gets to the point where it would be long enough, I'll post the illustration I have of him. I think it looks really natural and cool on him. Another reviewer asked about my upload time, and if I have chapters stockpiled that I put out. No, I wish I did, but I just write the whole chapter either in 1 or 2 sittings, and while I have a general idea of the story outlined, a lot of it is made up on the spot. Unfortunately, this means that I will probably have breaks longer than a week at times, or that I will write myself into a corner due to a lack of foresight. I am determined to not abandon this no matter what though. Nothing is more heartbreaking than finding an excellent story, only to have it be abandoned right before it gets to the good stuff. Well, maybe having your sensei eat your last cup of instant ramen, that white-haired bastard. I have decided to use mostly the English translations of jutsu with limited exceptions. I will try not to double up on English, Japanese words, like saying 3 sanin. Ninjutsu techniques, or Shadow Hokage, although I probably will use this term at some point, because I find it much easier. And I'm not to the point where the Japanese version sounds cooler for the jutsu. I do like Hiruzen and Flying Raijin instead of Flying Thunder God though. And probably will use both of them instead of FTG. That is not to say that Naruto is going to learn the jutsu, but it will obviously be referenced given, spoiler, his father is the Yondaime, so anyway, it will be cutting down on the translations that are written out as more jutsu are thrown around, and I won't have to look up as many translations as I'm more familiar with the English dub. If you don't like it, please let me know in the reviews. 1 year 10 months after Sasuke left MT. Myoboku, 2 years 8 months after Naruto left Konoha, January. Pervy Sage, where are we going? The 10-year-old asked. Jiraiya looked at the boy, who had grown a considerable amount in the last 2 years. We're headed back to the land of fire. I want to introduce you to someone, and you might just run into someone you already know. Naruto was excited by this, but Jiraiya cut him off before he could further question. You know the drill. What's shinobi rule number 8? Information is like ramen. Naruto questioned even though he already knew the answer. Jiraiya nodded. He had told Naruto that information was like gold, to which Naruto responded that gold wasn't all that important to him. He'd rather have a useful metal, like more kunai, or a sword. Most importantly though, he'd rather have ramen. The young blonde missed ramen. Sure, he still had it when they came across a town, but that was not as often as he would have liked, and the ramen was never as good as Ichiraku's. Right, if you want information, you gotta work for it. Would you give away ramen for free? The boy paled and shook his head vigorously. Exactly. I wanna see 5 perfect shunshin, body flicker, in a row. The body flicker technique was an invaluable one for all ninja, and performing one was not all that difficult. Performing several in a row, especially with a change of direction each time, was very difficult. Stop and starting so frequently threw off a ninja's balance, and could easily result in motion sickness. Something Naruto was currently experiencing as he threw up this morning's breakfast a rabbit that wasn't quite faster than the blonde. Sensei. Naruto had learned the slightest amount of respect as far as what to call him and when. Can't I do 5 gunshots instead? I never throw up after those, and they're way cooler. He complained. Alright, why don't you shoot 5 of them at me in rapid succession, and if you manage to hit me, I'll teach you a real flashy jutsu that the 4th Hokage invented. Jiraiya responded confidently. Naruto grinned bright as the sun. The Yondaime was his hero, and now he would get to learn one of his jutsu. You got it, geezer. Just let me know when you're ready. Naruto shouted. Before Jiraiya could reply, Naruto formed the hand seals, holding the tiger seal at the end, yelled, water release, gunshot, and spat out a ball of water about half Jiraiya's height. The toad sage had to give it to him, at least he knew how to use the element of surprise. That didn't mean that Jiraiya had to let him win though. Jiraiya made his own hand seal and shunshined out of the way with a grin befitting the ease at which he did it. Naruto made a face at him, and wound up another gunshot, a little bigger than the last, but once again, Jiraiya evaded him. This happened 2 more times, and after his 4th attempt, Naruto molded the largest gunshot that he could, a little over Jiraiya's height, and fired it as fast as he could at his sensei. The toad sage flickered out of the way with a careless ease yet again. Naruto was pissed. You know, Naruto, I think you could improve your speed. A 6th water gunshot flew at the toad sage faster than the previous 5, though smaller than its predecessors. Yes, I got him, Naruto shouted. He immediately felt something cold and sharp up against his neck, and wouldn't even risk a gulp for fear of nicking him. Now do you see why the body flicker is so important to master, Naruto? Naruto didn't respond, instead he just chuckled and poofed into smoke. Up in the nearest tree the real Naruto was beaming at how he had pulled one over on his sensei. He was committing to memory the face that Jiraiya had made, when he too poofed into smoke. Naruto didn't have time to feel shocked, as there was another kunai pressed to his neck. 40 years too young, kid. That was a nifty trick though. Probably would have had me if your shunshin was faster. Jiraiya laughed at him. Damn it. I really wanted to learn the fourth jutsu, ya know. Naruto grumbled. He normally could sense where Jiraiya was, something they had discovered came relatively easy to him. Jiraiya, however, was very adept at suppressing and masking his chakra, and Naruto couldn't feel even an iota of his presence if the Sannin put forth the effort to conceal himself. Well, Naruto, the fourth's original fighting style revolved around the Shunshin and Kawarimi. He used them to move about the battlefield with extreme speed. You read about his flying Raijin in one of the books that Sarutobi sent you, right? Naruto nodded excitedly. The flying Raijin was probably the coolest jutsu he had ever heard of, and he knew it was the Yondaimi's most signature move. He could teleport anywhere, and end a fight in less than a second. He had even been issued as an SS rank shinobi and given flee on-site orders during the Third Great Shinobi War. Badass. Jiraiya interrupted his daydreaming of his hero. Good, well, step 1 to utilizing that jutsu was already having the fighting style down. If you want to learn the flying Raijin, you better master the body flicker and substitution to the point where it's completely natural and you have full control over them. Naruto nodded again. If he wanted to surpass the fourth, first he had to reach him, and learning what was considered the most dangerous jutsu in the elemental nations was a good start. The blonde flashed through hand signs with practiced ease, and in a split second his sensei was looking at a log. Don't worry, sensei, I'll surpass the fourth Hokage, just you wait, ya know. He shouted from the ground a good ways away. Jiraiya let a smirk show, the kid was good entertainment if nothing else. Jiraiya body flickered down to Naruto, and the two started walking southwest towards the land of fire. They had spent the last month in the land of hot springs, Jiraiya meeting with a contact in his spy network, and getting in some extracurricular research while he was there. Sensei, permission to use my clones to train with the Shunshin? Naruto asked. Jiraiya sighed, thinking back to the Gaki's breakthrough discovery. Naruto was trying to get down a new chakra control exercise. He was required to balance a kunai, pointy end up, using his chakra. Essentially he would just be using the leaf sticking exercise, just on a much more difficult object. He kept using too much chakra, and the kunai would almost bounce off of his arm, repelled by his dense chakra. Jiraiya had found him in their camp clearing with 10 clones doing the exercise. Jiraiya of course knew that shadow clones transferred their memories back to the user, but he distinctly remembered not making it to that part of the explanation, because said blonde terror had cut him off. What are you doing? Jiraiya inquired. I'm using my clones to train. Naruto asked like it was obvious. This made Jiraiya think that he had caught on to one of the more important intricacies of the jutsu. Why is that? Jiraiya prodded further. Well, if one of me can figure it out in a few hours, 10 of me's should be able to figure it out in like 30 minutes, right? Naruto asked. Jiraiya nodded at this. While the training time wasn't necessarily pure division, if none of the clones figured out the trick to the exercise, he wouldn't progress past the beginning stages. It still would cut down on training time vastly. While this sounded nice, the downside was extreme migraines and potential brain damage or death. Knowing the Kyuubi and Uzumaki blood combination gave Naruto an unrivaled healing factor, he decided to watch and let the blonde work for a little bit. After about 10 minutes, one of the Narutos signaled the rest, and they all huddled up. After another minute, they broke apart and got back to work. What was that meeting all about? Jiraiya asked. Well, Naruto 7 figured out that if I treat it like the tree walking exercise and try and stick the kunai to me, it becomes easier to balance. Naruto explained. Jiraiya was really curious now, and then it dawned on him. Wait, are you just using the clones to come up with different ways to complete your training? Jiraiya questioned. Well, yeah, what else would they be for? Naruto replied. Jiraiya facepalmed. If he took care of the boy any longer, he was going to end up with a dented nose. Gaki, your shadow clones return their experiences to the user when they're dispelled. You don't have to have them stop to explain to you what they did that worked, you can just pop them, and their memories will become yours. Jiraiya drawled. Naruto didn't seem to comprehend this. But they have a different body from me, so they have a different brain, how could I have their memories? Do you remember the night you opened the Uzumaki scroll? Naruto nodded. Do you remember when I pushed you into that river? Naruto scowled, and nodded again. The old pervert had pushed him in several times if he remembered correctly. Gaki, I didn't push the real you in, I only pushed your clones in. You stayed in the clearing reading the scroll. Naruto's mouth opened and closed like a fish at this. The memories felt real, but they weren't particularly important events, so he couldn't really remember what happened before or after. Maybe that was because his clone didn't exist for very long before, and ceased to exist after. Jiraiya saw that it still didn't quite line up properly in Naruto's brain, so Jiraiya took a different route. Show me how well you can balance the kunai, he said. Naruto nodded and gave it a shot. He made it about 3 seconds. Jiraiya nodded at this and signaled Naruto's 10 clones to move out of the clearing about 30 feet with him. After 5 minutes, Jiraiya came back with the clones, and popped them one by one. He then asked Naruto to repeat the exercise. He managed 30 seconds this time. What's the secret to balancing the kunai? His sensei asked. Well, I just have to try and wrap my chakra around the ring and draw it in, just like you told me. Naruto explained. Right, but I didn't tell you, I told your clones in the clearing. Do you remember what you were looking at when I told you that? Naruto thought back to it, and could clearly picture several of his clones in his line of vision. Actually, he could remember Jiraiya telling him several times, with different angles of his clones. He could also remember Jiraiya stabbing him in the chest. He frowned and rubbed it. I see you've caught on. It's a peculiar feeling, isn't it? Jiraiya asked. What's that word mean? And don't stab my clones anymore, I can just dispel them, ya know. Naruto replied. Peculiar means strange, and usually in a particular way. Like a type of strange you haven't experienced before. Jiraiya explained. And I know you can just dispel them, but it's more fun to stab them because they look like you, and you annoy me. The Toad Sage explained. Naruto stuck his tongue out at him. He knew his sensei didn't mean anything malicious by his words, but he also knew that he was going to continue to stab his clones. Jiraiya laughed at his young charge. I don't want you using more than 10 at a time to train with them for now though, and I forbid you from using them without my permission, and for more than an hour for each clone before dispelling them. The jutsu passes on mental fatigue, so every clone you have will multiply your fatigue each time you pop one. You already have so few brain cells, I wouldn't want you losing any more. Jiraiya's grin was downright evil. Naruto threw a kunai at him knowing it wouldn't hit. He was insulted to see that the white-haired man caught it in his teeth. Salt in the wound. Fine, I'll follow your stupid rules, but you have to help me with my calligraphy skills. Naruto said. Jiraiya agreed. The boy had been having some trouble with his writing, and Jiraiya wouldn't let him advance to explosive tags without perfect handwriting. The two bonked forehead protectors, both of which said oil on them. It was an agreement Naruto had come up with when Jiraiya explained they were the only two people in the world with them. Shaking hands was too stale according to the blonde, and not unique enough for him. Jiraiya was brought out of his mental flashback by the Gaki's vibration. The boy was literally vibrating, waiting for permission. Jiraiya thought his new seal would drain some of his energy, but he still was just a ball of non-stop excitement. Very well. 10 clones, no more than an hour and a half for each one. You know how to stagger them so you don't get a headache. If you do get one, tell me right away. Jiraiya said sternly. Naruto rolled his eyes at him. He had never gotten a headache from using the shadow clone training technique. When he pushed his time limit and dispelled them all at once, he would be extremely disoriented for a few seconds, but that was the worst of it. Yes, pervy sage, I'll be very careful not to lose any of my precious brain power, the blonde grinned at him. It was Jiraiya's turn to roll his eyes as the blonde formed his favorite hand seal, multiplied by 10, and barked out orders to them. All 10 clones saluted seriously, and started body flickering around at different speeds and distances. Naruto found it was best that the clones tried different ways of doing a jutsu in order to find the optimal way to do it. Once he found the optimal way, all the clones would focus on increasing speed, power, precision, or volume, depending on the jutsu. The first couple of times he had tried it, it felt like he had only gotten better at being mediocre at what he was practicing. Like he had practiced at a slow pace a lot of times. Once he got the hang of the method, he could essentially have 10 people try a jutsu or exercise 10 different ways, and then hammer the optimal technique home nearly 10 times as fast. The initial stage took longer than one would expect, but once he had it figured out, he could improve faster than anybody. Sensei and student continued walking to intercept with Jiraiya's unknown colleague. Naruto either chatting away with Jiraiya himself or to a clone of himself, or Gamakichi, who had just transitioned from tadpole to toad. The small orange and purple toad was more than happy to sit on Naruto's head and chat with him, so long as he was provided snacks. Naruto was happy to have a friend to chat with, and summoned the fist-sized toad often while traveling. 1 hour out of Konoha. Kakashi, why are we walking at civilian pace? Ma, what's the rush, my cute little apprentice? The copy nin asked. We could be using this time to train, I can't let that loser get ahead of me. Sasuke replied. You think he's that strong, huh? Kakashi asked. Strong enough to take out the mighty Uchiha? Kakashi elbowed him teasingly. He was well aware of the boy's superiority complex when it came to the academy students. Sasuke scowled at him. If you would teach me some of your jutsu, I wouldn't have to be so worried. He has Jiraiya of the Sannin teaching him, all I have are my clan scrolls, and you know I can't read any of the good ones until I unlock my Sharingan. Kakashi smiled at the raven-haired boy. He was happy to see the boy he had come to see as a little brother figure had somebody that could challenge him. It was unhealthy to believe that you were above everybody else. Well, I can't wait to watch you two spar. I'm sure you won't have any trouble keeping up with him. Kakashi chuckled. He had watched the academy spars. The only one who could keep up with him was Shino Aburame because of his tactics, but his insect jutsu were a bad match for Sasuke's fire jutsu. Every other student was outmatched in their best category. He was faster than Kiba, stronger than Choji, if only by a little, unlikely to be smarter than the Nara heir, but it was hard to tell because of Shikamaru's lack of effort, and even better at taijutsu than Hinata, though Kakashi suspected she was holding back. Sasuke knew he was better than them, and he acted like it, hardly paying attention to any of them, except Shino's occasional comment. When Kakashi told him he was going to get to see Naruto, Sasuke had sharpened up. He insisted he needed to go train immediately. The blonde had a profound effect on him. You don't understand, Kakashi, he beat me. Me. Humility and Uchiha didn't often end up in the same sentence, but Kakashi detected a little bit of it in Sasuke's voice. He was surprised. Well, oh mighty Uchiha-sama, Kakashi said playfully, that was 2 years ago. I'm sure you've grown a lot since then. I bet you beat him easily just like the others. Kakashi couldn't help being defensive of Sasuke's skills, he had trained him after all. No new jutsu, just refining the skills he already had. He knew Jiraiya would be taking care of Minato-sensei's son, and that one day he would be a powerhouse, but he hadn't officially met the boy yet, so he was inclined to believe Sasuke was a lot stronger based on rumors. The copy nin had no idea just how outdated those rumors were. Naruto sensed Sasuke before he saw him, along with another vaguely familiar chakra signature. He channeled some chakra to his ears and nose, and smelled the two. One smelled like a campfire, probably Sasuke given how often he used fire jutsu and would be practicing with it, the other smelled like a storm and dogs. Naruto didn't have a lot of interaction with household pets in his travels, but it definitely smelled like dogs in addition to the ozone scent that accompanied lightning. He heard them next a crackle of a twig, the rustle of leaves, and the gentle thump of grass being displaced. Then he saw them, and was outraged. No way, bastard. Naruto was shocked to see Sasuke, but not because he didn't know he was coming. I could have sworn I'd be taller than you by now, ya know. Sasuke just smirked his Uchiha smirk, which just frustrated Naruto further. Damn it. I bet you have a bunch of cool new jutsu too, huh? Well, I got news for you, so do I. By the way, who's the dog guy? You didn't bring Kiba with you, did you? Sasuke ignored the question. Kakashi had taken to the trees, probably to test Naruto. He was weird like that. Huh, you think you've got cool new jutsu like your clone, huh? News flash, loser. 10 times 0 is still 0. Sasuke said coolly. Kakashi liked to talk trash like this when they sparred, and Sasuke had taken a liking to it. I'll show you who the 0 is. Toad oil bullet. Naruto shouted as he ran through hand signs. He spat out the oil at Sasuke, but was rewarded with a slicked up log for his troubles. TCH, is that all you got, Naruto? You're going to have to be much faster than that to hit me. Sasuke bragged from a tree branch up to his right. Naruto only smiled, before popping into smoke. Sasuke was on edge immediately, but couldn't react in time. A metal chain snaked its way around his ankle, and pulled him off of the branch. This time he couldn't substitute in time, and 4 Narutos held him down by his limbs. Ha ha ha, I got you good, huh Sasuke? The blonde cackled. Future Hokage. 1, bastard Uchiha. 0. TCH, you had that clone made before we even started the spar, that's cheating. Naruto waggled his finger at him. Rule number 1, Sasuke, rule number 1. And what would rule number 1 be, Naruto? A voice asked from behind him. The real him. The one up on a branch a safe distance away from Sasuke. He was so shocked he fell out of the tree. He got up rubbing his backside. Oi, who the hell are you? I recognize your chakra from somewhere. Kakashi seemed interested in this, but didn't question. Why, I'm Kakashi Hatake, Sasuke's big brother figure. Kakashi said. Best not to introduce himself as his big brother. Wouldn't wanna be confused with somebody who was a domestic terrorist. I told you I'm not calling you big bro. A muffled yell came from where Naruto's clones were pushing Sasuke's face into the grass. Now get the loser to release me. His anger was palpable. Naruto, could you be so kind as to release Sasuke? I believe you won the first round. Kakashi had been thoroughly impressed. Naruto had fought and defeated Sasuke like a shinobi, without following the rules or putting himself in danger. Naruto nodded, but didn't relax. He could still smell the dog and ozone, but it was coming from where Sasuke had appeared from. He couldn't smell the man in front of him at all despite channeling chakra to his nose. How come I can't smell you anymore? And why do you smell like dog anyway? Naruto asked. This confused both Sasuke and Kakashi, though for different reasons. I suppose you smell my summons, would you like to meet them? Kakashi asked. His dogs would love to meet his sensei's son. Naruto nodded at this. He liked all the toads, he didn't see why he wouldn't like Kakashi's summons. The Hatake ran through a familiar set of hand seals after biting his thumb, and placed his palm on the ground. Summoning jutsu. He called out lightly. 8 puffs of smoke came and went, and standing there were 8 different kinds of dogs. Pakun was the one to speak up. Yo, boss. What's the mission? He asked. No mission this time, Pak. Just wanted to introduce you to my new friend, Naruto. Kakashi said with an eye smile. Naruto had not missed the words he used. Friend? He asked. The one-eyed Jonin tilted his head and eye smiled at Naruto. That is, if it's okay with you, Naruto. Never one to pass up an opportunity to have a friend, Naruto nodded his head vigorously. Kakashi chuckled. Good. Well, these are my summons, they're Ninken ninja dogs. Pakun is the one who just talked, he has soft paws, you should feel them. Pakun nodded at this and held up a paw. Naruto reached out and felt it. It was really soft, even if this was weird. Kakashi then pointed down the line at the other 7 dogs. That's Bull, Urushi, Shiba, Bisuke, Akino, Ue, and Garuko. He finished. Naruto waved at the dogs. It's nice to meet you guys, I'm Naruto Uzumaki, future Hokage Yano. Naruto shouted. The dogs smiled and wagged their tails at him, and he laughed. Would you guys like to meet my summons? They're toads and they're super awesome. Naruto didn't hear a no, so he ran through the hand signs and summoned Gamakichi. Kichi, these are my new friend Kakashi's summons. Naruto listed off their names while pointing them out. Ninken, this is my friend Gamakichi, he can spit water out, it's awesome. Naruto yelled. Gamakichi demonstrated by spitting water into Naruto's face, no stronger than an average garden hose. The dogs all laughed, and Naruto sent Gamakichi off to play with them. Thanks Kakashi, Kichi's never gotten to play with other summons before. Naruto said excitedly. No problem Naruto. Where's Jiraiya-sama? Kakashi asked. The old perv is out finding us dinner. Naruto replied bluntly. Kakashi's sweat dropped. Alright, I'll go help him. Why don't you and Sasuke catch up? No fighting till Jiraiya or I get back though. Naruto and Sasuke both shouted indignantly that they didn't need babysitters to spar, but eventually relented and agreed after Kakashi rubbed their heads with his knuckles. When it was just the 2 of them, they plopped down in the clearing, Naruto laying on his back, and Sasuke coolly sitting up against a tree with his elbow propped up on his knee. So, Naruto said, looking for patterns amongst the leaves of the tree. Who the hell is this Kakashi guy? Naruto asked. Sasuke grunted. Some Jonin who started coming by my house to bother me. He keeps asking me to call him big bro. As if I'd ever do that after what happened with you know who. Naruto nodded from his place on the ground. He and Sasuke hadn't discussed it much, but he knew what his brother Itachi had done. If he's a Jonin, he must have cool jutsu. Did he teach you any? Naruto asked, steering the conversation away from sadness and hate. TCH. He's been holding out on me. I've heard rumors that he knows 1,000 jutsu. Sasuke said. Naruto sat up shocked at that. 1,000 jutsu was a lot. More than Jiraiya knew. Maybe even more than Hokage Jiji knew. Kakashi must be really strong. I thought he'd be strong too. Sasuke said, not needing to hear Naruto voice his opinion. But he acts so aloof all the time, and he's always late for everything. I just can't picture him being deadly. Sasuke said. Jiraiya says rule number 12 is that appearances are deceiving. If he knows 1,000 jutsu and he's a Jonin, he has to be super strong and awesome Yano. Naruto said. He seemed to be slightly calmer when it was just him and Sasuke, something the Uchiha was grateful for. You're just saying that because you like his summons. Sasuke replied, throwing a pebble at the blonde's forehead protector. It was the first time he'd seen him with it on, though he knew he was on the verge of earning it when he'd left the toad's home. Naruto shrugged. The 10-year-olds sat in a peaceful silence, both feeling more at ease around each other than they had at any other time in the last 2 years. There was an unspoken understanding between them. After about 15 minutes, Kakashi and Jiraiya came walking into the clearing, the former with a deer slung over his shoulder. Alright Gakis, Jiraiya said, early dinner first, and then you can spar. No shot pervy sage. If we're only gonna be here for a few days, I gotta beat the bastard as many times as I can Yano. Naruto shouted, once again full of energy. Sasuke grunted in agreement, he too wanted to fight Naruto, on even ground this time, to see where he stood. Language, Naruto, but I suppose sparring beforehand wouldn't hurt. Jiraiya relented, and they moved about 30 feet about in the clearing, and made the hand sign for a friendly spar. Jiraiya said, alright, on my mark. 3, 2, alright I guess you guys were eager. He said. Both Naruto and Sasuke had taken off at 2, trying to get the upper hand. They started with taijutsu this time, as their teachers often had them do when sparring. Naruto had superior speed and strength, which he had spent a lot of time working on, but Sasuke had much sharper and cleaner form, leading to him having the advantage. Naruto realized this after several exchanges, and leapt back, running and throwing shuriken that he pulled from the seal on the side of his scroll. Sasuke pulled a kunai from his pouch, and blocked all 6 of them, before throwing it at Naruto. The blonde rolled behind a tree, and ran off in 5 different directions when he emerged. Sasuke noticed 4 of them were just running, while the 5th one was watching Sasuke while he moved. That must be the real one, he thought, and gave chase. Pulling another kunai from his pouch, he lunged at Naruto, who just stopped and smiled. The kunai plunged into the boy's shoulder, and he poofed into smoke. Sasuke didn't have a chance to get angry, as he was tackled from behind. Stupid loser blonde always pulling tricks. Naruto stood with his foot planted on Sasuke's chest, a huge grin on his face. Gotcha again Sasuke, that's 2 for me. Sasuke smirked back at him though, and quickly ran through 3 hand signs. You should have restrained my hands loser. Lightning release. Paralyzing palm. Sasuke shouted, charging electricity up into his palm, and grabbing Naruto's exposed ankle. The blonde felt the charge shoot up his leg, and his whole body went numb, but hurt at the same time. His muscles gave out as they were no longer in his control, and he fell to the ground. Sasuke quickly pounced on him with a knee on his chest and a blunted kunai at his throat. That's 1 for me and 0 for you, Naruto. That first one didn't count. Sasuke said coolly. Oi, fine you won this one, but get off of me. The Uchiha obliged with a smirk. I thought you said the Cyclops was holding out on you. Naruto asked. Sasuke smiled. He might have given me 1 scroll for 1 jutsu. It's basically AD rank though. Hardly worth my time, but easily enough to defeat you, HN. Sasuke grunted. Kakashi smiled. Naruto had been good. He fought like both parents from what he had seen. Unpredictability and brawling like Kushina, but strategic thinking and speed like Minato. He was proud of him, and Sasuke too. Watching them interact reminded him of he and Obito, though they seemed to have a better understanding of each other than Obito had. The boys faced off several more times over the next couple of days. Most of their fights ended in a draw, much to their combined frustration. They each had strengths and weaknesses that the other didn't, and fighting each other brought their weaknesses to the forefront of their intention. By the time they parted ways, Naruto had a drive to increase his proficiency in taijutsu and weapon skills, and Sasuke wanted to increase his speed and strength to a higher level to keep up with Naruto. Sasuke wanted to find a way to cut through Naruto's needle jizo. His weapon skills weren't as valuable if they couldn't cut through his hair. Of course, both boys wanted to increase their jutsu arsenals, though Naruto currently had a more versatile repertoire. Sasuke's were extremely effective, and more offensively oriented. Naruto also desperately wanted to learn jutsu to counter lightning jutsu. Sasuke had told him that was his natural affinity, which left Naruto curious as to what his was. He knew of affinities, but Jiraiya had never specifically focused on the topic, so he didn't know what his was. He was just praying that it wasn't earth, as he knew it was weak to lightning. Lightning release. Paralyzing palm. D-rank lightning ninjutsu. The user makes the necessary hand signs, and channels lightning chakra across their hand, though it is not condensed like the Chidori. Similar to the wind release. Gale palm in difficulty, though less powerful. Essentially a taser. The chain that Naruto used on Sasuke is shaped exactly like one of Kushina's chakra chains. It's an Uzumaki training item for people who have the special chakra for it, though Naruto doesn't know that. Naruto has learned the Academy 3 minus the regular Bunshin. In its place, he has shadow clones. Water clones needs water to do this though, and another surprise or two. His needle jizo can't cover his whole body like Jiraiya. Instead, it just wraps over his shoulder and covers his upper body to protect his organs mostly. He does no water release. Gunshot, but any Chunin who knows this can likely outdo him at it, especially if water is their affinity. Water is not Naruto's affinity, but like Sasuke learned the fireball in canon, he just powered through learning it because he was determined to match Sasuke. I guess this means he has a rudimentary version of change in chakra nature. I don't know, the story feels inconsistent when it comes to chakra natures. If anybody can use any nature without going through the proper training to change the nature, then I feel like we'd see a lot more than the 5 or 6 that use all 5 natures. Kakashi would definitely have some wind jutsu if it was at all possible. Anyway, he's extremely strong for an academy student, and would beat most genin, but every jutsu he has could be improved greatly still. Sasuke has the Academy 3, Great Fireball, Flame Bullet, and now Paralyzing Palms, which I made up, as well as greater skill with kunai and shuriken, and use of ninja wire. I would say Sasuke's jutsu are all farther along, though Naruto's counter his well so they don't have to be as powerful or sharp. Sasuke has also started his lightning release training with Kakashi, though he doesn't know it yet, and it will take him a really long time to get the first stage down. 1.5 years later, June, Naruto and Sasuke are 11. He was finally here. As Naruto stood before the village, he felt some apprehension and nervousness. Was it right to come back here? Was it okay for him to be here? Did he truly belong? Uzushiogakure. The home of the Uzumaki clan. The old Uzumaki clan. The new one would be rebuilt in Konoha when Naruto returned in a few months. The village was mostly ruins at this point, and what wasn't in ruin was overrun by plant life. If one were to view the village from the sky, they would notice a certain pattern that the buildings formed. There were no walls in Uzushio. A people of Fuinjutsu and barrier ninjutsu had no need for such crude landmarks or defenses. Naruto walked slowly through the village, taking it all in. Jiraiya was following the boy, but not too closely. Naruto had matured a lot in the time that he had been with Jiraiya, and he felt the boy needed to take on this adventure alone. It was his clan after all, and he would be the head of it soon enough. Amongst the rubble of buildings, Naruto saw plenty of seals and barrier formulas inked onto the ground, all completely out of chakra after decades without a recharge. Whenever he came across one, even if he recognized it, he formed what had become his signature hand seal, and had a shadow clone record the technique in a scroll, before handing it to Jiraiya to keep track of. Master and student continued walking, occasionally recording down seals, before coming to the center of the village. The main tower, where the village leader worked, and the records and jutsu archive would be if it was anything like Konoha. Naruto's curiosity piqued, as did Jiraiya's, when they realized the building was essentially untouched. Aside from the emptiness and lack of life in it, the building could have been in use yesterday, and they never would have known. Approaching the doors, Naruto recognized the seal on the door. It was extremely similar to the blood seal that accompanied his Uzumaki scroll that Sarutobi had given him. Jiraiya examined the seal, and the ones that branched off of it. He hummed while he worked. While he was technically a master, he was never able to really get to the point where he used Fuinjutsu in battle the way that Minato and Kushina had, but he had always enjoyed the art, and considered it a hobby. After a minute or two, Jiraiya spoke. I won't be able to go in, Whiskers. Jiraiya used Naruto's least favorite nickname, the one that he had come up with to counter, Pervy Sage. The blood seal extends to a barrier jutsu that seems to draw chakra from the surrounding area. Jiraiya said. He'd never seen a seal that could absorb nature chakra, not even amongst the knowledge of his toad summons. That wasn't important right now though, he would record the seal for Naruto's library so they could study it later. Without permission from whoever made the barrier, or the right passcode, I won't be able to enter. Your Uzumaki blood should let you pass though. Naruto nodded, and bit his finger, swiping the blood across from the seal, and making a hand seal to release it. The black seals lit up gold for a brief second, before dulling down. Nothing bad happened, so Naruto took that as acceptance, and pushed the door open. The building really was a lot like the Hokage Tower. They would have been built around the same time, by allies too, so he supposed that made sense. He first headed to the archive room, knowing it would only be up one floor from where he was. There were no seals on the room when he found it, so he pushed on through the door. Nothing. Literally nothing. The room was completely empty, save for a seal that was on the middle of the floor. He recognized the basis of the seal. It was used to destroy documents that fell into the wrong hands. Though this one was much more complicated, he supposed that it was to clean house in the room, but not destroy the room itself. He had been studying Fuinjutsu relentlessly in the past year and a half, though it was extremely slow going. For starters, he had just cleared Jiraiya's calligraphy test so that he could start working with more dangerous seals 3 weeks ago. It was a prerequisite before Jiraiya would let him come here. Second, as much as he had learned to enjoy reading and learning, it was still difficult for him. His attention span was short, and he had trouble focusing on a book for longer than 20 minutes before he found himself rereading lines and becoming mentally fatigued. He had improved this to 45 minutes over the last couple of months, but that still wasn't enough. He had tried using clones, but they had the same attention span as him, so while he could take in more information, it was still slow going. He also had to read a book or scroll several times before he properly learned the information, which was frustrating because a shadow clone would only clone the cover of the book, and any page that it was open to, or that he had memorized. This made memorizing a book slow going, because it would still take him 2 or 3 days to get through once, and 2 or 3 more to actually absorb the info. Reading really just wasn't his thing, as important as he knew it was. He learned much better through trial and error, and feeling things out. Jiraiya had assured him that the more advanced stages of Fuinjutsu were all trial and error, but not before he suggested he give it up. Naruto had been furious at this, and doubled his efforts. He was an Uzumaki, and he would be feared for his Fuinjutsu prowess, or he'd die trying. He'd told Jiraiya that he'd give up ramen before he'd give up Fuinjutsu. That had opened the Sanin's eyes. He was extremely disappointed that the records room was destroyed, though he wasn't surprised. Jiraiya had prepared him for this possibility, but he had been hoping it wouldn't be true. He moved on. The 3rd and 4th floor would be the Jutsu library. He took the winding stairs to the 3rd floor, and entered without trouble. There was nothing in there either, just empty bookshelves. In his anger, he kicked a bookshelf over in his anger. What he saw, or rather didn't see, was quite surprising. No dust anywhere in the room, the very abandoned room. Naruto made the hand seal to create shadow clones, but nothing happened. He tried again, and nothing happened. Then he saw the big sign that read, "No Jutsu," and frowned. It apparently wasn't a suggestion. Naruto exited the room and stood right outside the door. He tried to make a shadow clone, and this time it worked. He made 20 more, and had them fan out through the 3rd floor and the rest of the building, checking everywhere they could for seals. If there was no dust, and nobody here to clean it, then there must be jutsu keeping the building clean, just as there was keeping it protected. When he made it to the 4th floor, he couldn't get into the room. This room would be for Jonin ninja and above. There was a guard station right next to it, so he guessed Jonin were either expected to get cleared to enter, have the jutsu password, or be able to hack the seal. Looking at it, he could guess that if he tampered with it too much, it would destroy the contents of the room. If it hadn't already, he sighed, he wouldn't be able to get in this room for a while, it seemed. He decided to head to the top floor. The office of the cage. The history books had said that only the leaders of the 5 great nations could name their leader a cage. Uzushiogakure, while small, was dangerous enough to name their leader a cage. The Uzukage. Jiraiya said their refusal to remove Cage from their village leader's title was likely one of the reasons that they were destroyed. The large wooden double doors were so elegantly carved it looked as if they hadn't been carved at all, but rather formed that way. These doors, too, had a complex seal, though it didn't appear that anything would be destroyed if it was tampered with. It was strange that this door had less security than the Jonin-level jutsu library, but then again the most powerful person in the village was usually within this room. He supposed that while the village was still operational, it would have been foolish to try and break in, and likely akin to suicide. Naruto decided it was time to test his newest Fuinjutsu theory, centered around his nine-tailed tenant. He closed his eyes, and made the rat seal, focusing on entering his mindscape. After a few seconds, he felt a somewhat familiar pull in the back of his mind, and let it overtake him. Naruto found himself in his mindscape, which was built a lot like an underground facility. It had one long hallway, and a giant cavernous room, like a warehouse, that held the caged beast. The remnants that reminded him of a sewer, the pipes that ran along the roof, and the rotten smell, were gone. Now it was a more neutral place, and not quite so dark. The water on the floor of the cage room was still there, and Naruto had begun to suspect that this represented the fox's chakra that was constantly being pushed into his system. The deep rumble of the fox's breath told Naruto that he was asleep. "I know you're not asleep, you grumpy old fox, or at least pretending to be. Now get up," he shouted in his most shrill voice. The fox's ears twitched back at it, and he slowly opened an eye. "What do you want, brat?" The mass of chakra grumbled. "I wanna try my Fuinjutsu theory, but I need your chakra." The 11-year-old called out. "No. Now leave, you insolent flea." The fox replied. Naruto giggled at the fox's insult. They weren't very insulting when it was stuck behind the bars of the seal. "But you know that the more chakra you let me use, the more the seal loosens." Naruto sang to the fox. He knew it wasn't a joking matter, but he also knew that it was the best motivation to get the fox to let him use his chakra. The nine tails grumbled. What the boy said was true, though he hated that it was. He didn't want the brat to use the chakra for something so trivial. It should be used to inspire fear in others. He was the most powerful being in the world, his chakra shouldn't be used for cat burglary. "No," was his short response. He closed his open eye, signifying the end of this conversation. "Oh come on, why do you have to be so grumpy? Is it because you have all those pointy teeth, but no toothbrush? I can get you a toothbrush." Apparently a certain child didn't understand the giant fox's body language. Naruto knew what he was doing though. He didn't get a response, so he carried on. "Now Mr. Fox," Naruto said, knowing it would enrage Kyuubi. He wouldn't have to call him that if he would just tell him his name, though the fox insisted he didn't have a name. "You know I will do the thing if you don't give me what I want," Naruto said. The fox's eye opened back up. He did not want Naruto to do the thing. He also didn't want to give Naruto his chakra, as the brat was disrespectful, and hadn't offered him anything in return, except for an unlikely way of escaping. He closed his eye again. Maybe if he fell asleep, the blonde would leave him alone. "Alright, you brought this upon yourself though. Shadow clone jutsu," Naruto yelled. 50 copies of himself burst into existence, all with huge grins on their faces. Naruto knew the only thing more annoying to the fox than him talking, was a bunch of him talking. "Hey Fox. Oh Mr. Fox. Do you like ramen? Do you have any brothers or sisters? How'd you get to be so big anyway?" 51 different Narutos shouting random questions at the same time appeared to do the trick. "Fine you insolent little brat. I will gift you a drop of my chakra, and when I get out of here, I'm going to eat you for an appetizer before I eat the villagers of the leaf," the nine-tailed fox yelled. Naruto dispelled his clones with a big smile. "Thank you Mr. Kyuubi, I appreciate your help. I am not helping you, I'm just getting rid of you so I can sleep," the fox replied, pushing a small amount of chakra through the seal. It was much easier than it had been the first time he had done it back when Naruto was 7, though it still took way too much effort to try and make a break for it. "Whatever you say, I appreciate it regardless, thank you," Naruto shouted before fading out of his mindscape. The fox went back to trying to sleep. In all honesty, the 50 clones of Naruto were annoying, but he could sleep through them if need be. What was unbearable was the blonde's chakra when he performed jutsu. He hated how much it reminded him of Kushina's, of the chains that had bound him. More than that though, he hated how much it felt like his creator's. The blonde's chakra was nearly identical to the Sage of Six Paths, and it brought him great pain, and a lot of anger. The human had no business being mentioned in the same thought as the sage, let alone being compared to him. He couldn't help it though, the thoughts appeared despite his best efforts to ignore him. The warmth of the chakra, the memories that accompanied them, it all made him so angry. The brat didn't even know that he was using ninju subconsciously, and that angered him even more. All in all, it was easier to just give the blonde what he wanted so he would leave. Naruto was right where he had left himself, and he put his hand on the seal of the door, and started channeling the Kyuubi's chakra. If anybody had seen him, they would have noticed his hair lengthen ever so slightly, and his fingernails and canine teeth sharpen ever so slightly. More noticeable would have been the slitted pupils in his still blue eyes. The fox's chakra was incredibly corrosive, something that made Naruto frown. He knew that chakra often reflected a person's feelings as it was inherently and deeply linked to who they were. He could only assume it was the hate the fox had for the world and for humans that made his chakra so volatile. It made him sad that any being could feel that way. Still though, the chakra was eating at and overwhelming the seal on the door, and soon there was nothing left. Naruto pushed the doors open. The setup of the room was eerily reminiscent of the Hokage's office back in Konoha, at least what Naruto could remember of it. Looking around, he noticed there was a pattern on the walls in front of him. Upon closer inspection, he realized that the pattern extended to the floor and ceiling too. Seals. It should have been obvious immediately given where he was, yet he was still surprised. In all his reading he hadn't heard of having an entire room covered in seals. In fact, the largest seal that had been covered was a barrier that was meant to protect large areas like villages. Of course those needed multiple seals working together, but they were no larger than the scroll on Jiraiya's back. He actually recognized some of the seals. One of them was a simple converter. Chakra would run through the seal, and the energy would be converted into light. It didn't appear to be giving any off right now, as it was midday, and there were large windows that kept the room lit. Another seal seemed to be a simple detector seal, which would recognize the amount of light in the room, and whether or not the room was occupied. He would have thought that he wouldn't be able to channel chakra in here either, but he was able to make a few shadow clones to record the seals. As basic as their application, there were still parts of the seals that he didn't recognize, and studying them might reveal something important. When it came to Fuinjutsu, you could never have too much information. Naruto made his way across the room to the desk, his short ponytail bobbing against his upper back as he did so. The desk, much like the doors, was made of intricate wood. In fact, it seemed to be an exact replica of the one in the Hokage's office, save for the Uzumaki symbol carved into the front of it. He ran his hand across the smooth face of the desk as he worked his way around it, not finding a speck of dust. When he made his way behind it, he pushed the chair out of the way. He wouldn't sit in it yet, it was reserved for a shinobi with much more power than what he had. The desk seemed simple enough. A few drawers on either side, and they didn't even seem to be sealed shut. Just to get in the room you'd have to get through several layers of security, and probably whatever Uzushio had that was equivalent to Anbu. Naruto opened the first drawer on the left. An ink jar, brush, and a few blank scrolls. Naruto had plenty of those things himself, so he let them be. The next drawer down had a few kunai and shuriken, though he wasn't sure why they were just sitting there given the village's Fuinjutsu abilities. The final drawer on the left side was completely empty, so he moved on to the other side. More of the same in the first two drawers on the right side, disappointingly enough. The last drawer, however, was different. He found familiar storage seal in this one, exactly like the one on his Uzumaki scroll that the Sandaime had given him. Reopening the already closed wound that he used to unseal the doors into the building, Naruto let the blood seep for a second before swiping it across the seal while channeling chakra. This time around, it seemed to take an extra few seconds before accepting him with a flash of deep red. A flash of smoke revealed one large scroll, with many more seals running all over it. Naruto knew from one look that he wouldn't be able to open it, so he sealed it within his own storage seal, and stood up. On the wall opposite him, next to the door that he had entered through, he saw two pictures. Given what he knew about Konoha's Hokage office, he figured that these must have been the two Uzukage that the village had. He approached the two images, both of which were of long white-haired men. The first one had a pair of very familiar-looking white sword handles sticking up over his shoulders. Naruto held his breath. Had his mother really left him with the weapons of the Shodai Uzukage? First Uzukage. He suddenly felt a weight on his shoulders. These two men led a village feared enough that it took a combination of three great villages to destroy it. Now he was all that was left to live up to that reputation. It was a lot to take in, and a lot that he would have to rebuild. He silently swore that he would surpass both of them. Naruto and Jiraiya were making their way back to Konoha, much slower than the blonde was happy with. As nervous as he was to go back to the village, he was eager to return to his home. He may not have had many friends or any real family, but there were still several people that he was aching to see. Iruka Sensei, Tsuki, Ayame, Hokage Jiji, Kakashi Sensei, he had taught him a thing or two when they met up. Heck, he even wanted to see Sasuke, even if it was just to kick his butt. He was also much different than he had been the last time that he had been there, and he was looking forward to trying to make friends in his class again. He was also looking forward to playing some harmless pranks with his acquired ninja skills. He had just been starting to develop a reputation as a prankster when he first left, and he had a lot of ideas that had gone unused. Now that he could walk on walls, it would be even easier. He frowned. According to Jiraiya, he was to be publicly instated as the heir to the Uzumaki clan. While the clan had not had a large basis in the Leaf, it was well respected. He knew that he wouldn't be able to play pranks on the village at large or the random shopkeepers who treated him poorly. Speaking of which, Jiraiya had mentioned that training with him might be enough to sway some people to think of him as more than the Biju that was sealed within him. The people of the village had a great deal of respect for the Sannin, and as Jiraiya was the only one that was still somewhat within the village, he currently held the most respect. Still, others would lose all respect for the Toad Sage, thinking that he had sided with the nine-tailed fox that had nearly destroyed the village. Naruto had felt bad about that, but Jiraiya didn't seem to care too much. Still, he was grateful that the Sannin had taken him from the village and given him the means to take care of himself, more psychologically than physically. Naruto shook his head at his thoughts. The villages really didn't know any better, and he supposed that if he were in their spot, he probably wouldn't like himself all that much either. Still, a part of him resented them for not seeing that he was just a child struggling to find his way in life. Cheer up, kid. I told you, the villagers will come to realize soon enough. Sometimes Naruto wondered if Jiraiya could read minds. He had heard of a clan in Konoha that could do that. Maybe the Toad Sage was secretly a part of them. I know, I'm just nervous about going back. Before I came with you, I was naive to the treatment I was receiving. Now I'm not so sure how I'll take it, and part of me is scared that I'll begin to resent the village because of it. Naruto said. Jiraiya internally whistled. The boy had come a long way when it came to his dialect. Not that he showed it often. He was still the loud knucklehead that played pranks and worshipped ramen, but now he was capable of speaking in a respectable manner. Knowing you, you might get upset, but you won't truly resent the village. You have too much kindness in your heart. Just like your parents. Jiraiya's eyes glazed for a split second while he thought of the two, and he came to a decision. Sarutobi hadn't explicitly given him permission to tell Naruto this information, so technically he was to be sentenced to death for revealing it. His sensei wouldn't have him killed for it though, he was too valuable to the village. At least he thought he was. Speaking of which, when you're revealed as the Uzumaki clan heir, there will be some complications. Jiraiya said. Naruto's head tilted like a confused dog. It was still adorable even though he'd lost a little bit of the roundness in his face. There was only one Uzumaki left in the village 12 years ago. Many of the Jonin that are Kakashi's age and older will remember her, as will all of the clan heads. Many of these people were aware of her relationship with your father, though it was technically in secret. Jiraiya explained. Naruto's deductive skills had grown greatly as Jiraiya challenged them throughout their time together, so it only took him a few seconds to reach his conclusion. They'll know who my dad was? He questioned. He had often questioned Jiraiya, but he always got the same response. That it was too dangerous for him to know. Correct. He had picked up quite the reputation, and was well known within the village. The clan heads and the smarter Jonin will make the connection instantly, so I think it's time I tell you. Jiraiya explained. If he hadn't seemed so serious, Naruto would have thought he was messing with him. I cannot stress enough how serious this situation is. I believe you have matured enough to know, but you are not yet powerful enough to have it openly revealed. If the shinobi world finds out, you will be targeted. You have to be able to dispose of Jonin-level threats, or at least be able to escape them before we can reveal it. Jiraiya said. His voice was sharp, and sterner than Naruto had ever heard it, even sterner than the time he had tried to make an explosive note without Jiraiya's permission, and burnt his eyebrows off. I would like to hold this off until you turn Jonin yourself, but I'm afraid too many of the shinobi will figure it out, and from there it will inevitably leak out. Jiraiya said. Reaching into his vest, he withdrew a small square from his inner pocket. A photograph. Naruto found it strange that it wasn't something he kept sealed away, as Jiraiya didn't carry many things on his person besides his large scroll, and his notebook for research. Jiraiya looked at the photo, tears forming in his eyes. It had been years since he'd looked at the photo, but he always kept it in his pocket over his heart. He had considered the man in it a son, though he was technically only his sensei. He slowly handed the photo over to Naruto, as a lone tear slid slowly down his left cheek. He was one of a kind, kid. He was like the son I never had. Jiraiya said so quietly that Naruto had to channel chakra to his ears to hear. Naruto took the photo and looked at it. His heart was pounding in his ears, and his hands were shaking. The first thing that he noticed was the vibrant red hair of his mother. His pregnant mother. And standing next to her, huge grin on his face, and hand on her belly was. This is the Yondaime. Naruto said in shock. Jiraiya nodded. My father was the fourth Hokage. Jiraiya nodded again, not knowing what to say. I this know. Naruto said. He bit his lip drawing blood, but the photograph didn't change. He built up his chakra as much as he could, and released it violently, the grass around him shifting slightly. No change. This can't be real, I can't be his son. He said out of breath. It's true, was all Jiraiya could respond with. He knew Naruto would be mad at him, and he was waiting for the eventual explosion. It never came. Silent tears streamed down Naruto's face. His vision was so blurry he couldn't see the photo in his hands anymore, but he'd never be able to unsee it. He was the son of the fourth Hokage. The son of his hero, and one of the most feared shinobi of all time. When he finally regained his composure, after nearly a full minute, he spoke. You gotta be kidding me, pervy sage. He choked out, snot streaming out of his nose as he did so. Jiraiya didn't know what to say. Naruto was as unpredictable as ever. Seeing that he wasn't going to say anything, Naruto elaborated. I'm the son of two of the most badass ninja ever. Naruto half-asked half-stated. They died because of me. He said after a moment of realization. Jiraiya had told him that his mother was the previous Jinchuriki, and that she had died helping the fourth seal the fox away. No Gaki, they died for you. It wasn't your fault the fox escaped the seal, and it wasn't your fault that you were suited to be a host, better than anybody else in the village. Jiraiya said firmly. He didn't want to leave any doubt in Naruto's mind. They loved you more than anything, even before you were born. You should have seen how excited the two of them were when they found out. Jiraiya explained. I had parents who loved me. Naruto asked rhetorically. He couldn't wrap his mind around it. First he thought that he had been abandoned. Then he found out he had a mother who loved him, but part of him still thought that his father had abandoned him, and that's why nobody would tell him about it. But they had both loved him, both sacrificed their lives so that he and the village could live on. In that moment he gained another burden. For some reason though, this one didn't add to the weight on his shoulders, it lifted it a little bit. He had lofty goals, and his parents had done everything they could to help him achieve it. Now it was up to him. Did my father leave me anything? Naruto asked, wanting to have a piece of his father just as he did of his mother. Jiraiya nodded. Back in the village there's some things. His notes on jutsu and seals, including his most signature one. A few of his kunai are there, and if my memory is correct, one of his cloaks, though it's probably too big for you. He said. Naruto nodded back, that was more than he was expecting. Much more. The Yondaime, his father, was most known for his use of the flying Raijin, the jutsu that gave him the flee on-sight order. He assumed it would be impossibly difficult for him to learn, as there were only two known wielders of it in Konoha's history, both of them being Hokage. If there was one thing he enjoyed though, it was the thought of doing something impossible. Alright, Naruto said, face determined and stoic, let's get to work then. Jiraiya just shook his head. Whiskers, don't you think you should take some time to process this? Jiraiya asked. It's kind of a big deal, and you were in shock at least for a second, maybe you should just rest for the rest of the night. Pervy sage, both my parents died to save the village. Now you're telling me that I'll have Jonin-level threats after me because of who they were. It would be a disservice to them to die from one of their enemies after all that they sacrificed for me. I have to get strong enough to survive, and I have to do it fast if what you said about Leaf Shinobi figuring it out is true. Naruto explained seriously. Plus, Kage don't just grow on trees, and Old Man Third ain't getting any younger. He finished. Jiraiya was once again given a warm feeling by his student's almost palpable determination. Jiraiya pondered the blonde's words. He was honestly above beginner genin levels already, and was seriously approaching chunin level with his ninjutsu. His knowledge was expanding rapidly with clones, and he was even getting some experience as Jiraiya had been giving him mock missions as a part of his training. The blonde's fuinjutsu was higher than 90% of the village so far, only being topped by the Sealing Corps, some of the Yondaime's closest allies, and perhaps the Hyuga clan elders, who needed a baseline knowledge to be able to perform the caged bird seal. Still, while fast enough to outdo most genin, he would likely be taken care of fairly easily by any chunin that had already reached maturity. His strength was good, really good for someone so young, but still not enough to overtake most chunin. His body just wasn't developed enough to take on older opponents physically yet. His chakra control was basically to the point where he could start channeling it internally to enchanted movements though, and that could make up a lot of ground. Alright Gaki, we can start taking your training seriously. Naruto smiled at Jiraiya's response. But, you have to understand how hard it'll be. If we're gonna do this, it'll be painful, you will break bones. If you're not on your game, you could potentially take a fatal wound if a kunai slips by your guard. It won't be a game anymore. You have to be sure that you're ready. Jiraiya explained sharply. He preferred his carefully crafted aloof attitude, but sometimes it was necessary to get serious. Naruto gulped at his sensei's declaration. His eyes never softened though, and his face never lost its steel. I have to be ready, there is no other option Jiraiya-sensei. There are too many people counting on me. Jiraiya knew he didn't just mean the people he loved. The dumb blonde truly believed with all his heart that he needed to protect the village that shunned him. Jiraiya had never been more proud. Alright, Naruto, we have about 3 months until you start the academy. I will devote my full attention to you until then. No meeting with contacts, no spying, no research, just you. Jiraiya said, slightly shocking Naruto. Once we get to the village and you enroll in the academy,